I am going to talk you through how the fashion industry cuts leather for mass production. Also, some tips and tricks on how you can cut leather at home. Number one, when you order leather, you're going to get it in a rolled bundle like this. Do not fold your leather unless you want a permanent crease wherever you folded it. It's ding dang near impossible to press out a crease once it's there. Okay, so store it in rolls like this. You should store it horizontal. You should store it away from light. Try to stay away from too much moisture, too much dryness. Okay, you don't want to, crush the ends by storing it like this. Okay, but you want to store it horizontally. Normally, I cover the whole thing in brown picture paper or extra dot paper, and I would store it under my cutting table. That's like, it has a raised, it's like a bottom shelf under my cutting table, not the floor, or on shelves, okay, something like that. This is lambskin. You could tell by its size, first of all, and also by how supple it is. And you will see metallic paint notations on the back, numbers: 100, 90, 92. This is actually the square footage. This is 9.2 square feet. This is 9.0 square feet. This is 10.0 square feet for the skin. Now, that doesn't mean that that is 10 feet of cuttable leather. Because as you can see, all these edges, okay, they're not folded because, the tanner doesn't like you and didn't do a good job. He wants you to have cuttable space. It's just leather is never perfectly flat. Okay, the edges on these skins, like the middle is the back of the animal, and the edges are where they started wrapping around necks and legs, and so those have the rippling, rounded, stretched shapes. They're not going to tan flat. That's why you get these little folds in here, because they tried to tan it as flat as possible so you can have the most cutting space, but they're not going to be perfectly flat. Okay, which is why you cannot automate leather. You cannot actually mass cut leather, because every single leather skin is different from the other. When you cut a t-shirt or jeans, you like layer the fabric. The fabric is supposed to be identical all down the roll. It was manufactured that way. And so they just layer several layers on top of each other, lay the marker on top, and then you use a huge vertical knife to cut around the pattern shapes so that you are cutting multiple copies of that one pattern piece at a time. But in leather, you have to individually cut every single piece, because every single leather piece is different, and that is part of why leather is so expensive and that leather has a higher perceived value. So, even if you have a fake leather, if it looks really, really good, looks like a really good fake, then it has a higher perceived value than other fabrications. I am going to cut my corset out of this. That's why I pulled this roll from my storage. Leather technically has no grain, and so you don't have to sit there with a ruler and make sure that your pattern pieces are parallel to the selvage, or your grain is parallel to the selvage. However, you have placements and a basic direction things should be cut in. Okay, this right here where I've placed my ruler, this is 61 inches, 24 inches and 61 centimeters, just for scale. A size 4 pencil skirt pattern I did in my Patreon pattern making class. And I would still, okay, there's nothing to go off of in terms of where's the selvage, but I would still lay it in the general direction of the spine for best effect. Okay, and the center is where the tanning will be the best and the most unflawed, with things like stretch marks, branding, scarring, ripples, anything like that. So anything where people are it's gonna be front and center, like this is the front of the skirt, the front panels of a jacket, the lapel, okay? Those are the parts where people are really gonna see things and need to be cut in the middle. As you get closer to the edge and you have ripples, there are sections where you can just smooth things out and flatten it, okay? And you can cut things like your under collar, your collar stand. If you have a two-piece collar and your collar stand is mainly going to be hidden by the actual collar. Inside waistbands, not the outside. Inside cuffs, if you have a two-piece cuff, you know, where they're sandwiched together before sewn onto the sleeve. Okay, those kinds of things can be cut along the edges. Whereas in the center, you want the back of the jacket. You know, patch pockets should also, because like patch pockets are on the butt. People look at butts, boom, okay? So you want your nicer pieces in the center, okay? Let's talk about cut lines for a second. So this pencil skirt fits nicely inside this lambskin. However, this is a size 4, okay? If you're a size 4, you're only making clothes for yourself, you're fine. You're fine. You actually have room to cut the other half, I think. If I go like this, I go like this, I still have leather over here, whatever. But in production, when you're doing mass production, you have to think about what is the size of this panel for your largest size. Okay, it's not going to look great if your size 4 is one panel, and then you have your center front seam, and then your size 12 has a big old cut line across it. Cut lines should be integrated as part of your design, you know, not some afterthought where you're just like, bam, here. Okay, wherever you place your cut line, it should be strategic, it should be well-intentioned design, artful placement, specific, meaningful placement, not just some arbitrary, let's just put it here. Let's talk about cutting. You want to use fabric weights because even though right now it's not moving because there's enough, you know, friction in the tension, okay, you want to just be double sure of that when you are cutting your leather. This is oak tag. It's about the same paper as like a manila file folder. And you can just take a marker like when it's not black, okay, and just draw all around it, and then you'll have the outline. And then once you have your outline, you can make sure that there are no blemishes inside your pattern piece, okay? That's one way of doing things. If you have black leather, this is my favorite thing to mark patterns, okay? I'm running low, but there's white chalk powder in here. It's got a little serrated wheel. So it's like a tracing wheel meets white powder distributor. That just sounds terrible. I don't want to start marking up the middle here because it does, because of the little spokes, it does drop teeny tiny little, they don't go all the way through, but indents in the leather. And so I just, and you got to use a thick paper like this so that you can press up against the edges. And I don't know if you can see that. Do you see that line, that little line that I punched in? It's much easier to see in person. And then you can cut along that edge. If your pattern is on dot paper and you just have so many pieces, you do not have the time or wherewithal to transfer them to a block paper, here is something you can do. Okay, this is just an old demo in my Patreon pattern making class for a puff sleeve. And, you know, it's hard to like mark up against dot paper, you know, because there's not enough thickness to butt your pen across on. And so what I would do is I would very carefully tape the dot paper onto the leather, okay? And I would make sure that, you know, you're not leaving too many gaps. You don't want to waste too much leather. So I would try to tape as neatly as possible, where it's just the bare minimum to secure the leather onto the paper. And then I do not recommend using pins to pin your pattern down. I generally do not like this because the way it picks up the fabric and makes it bumpy and everything, it leads to little inaccuracies here and there that can add up to more, especially when your pattern pieces are so small like my corset is. Also, I don't like punching holes in the leather unless I really need it. And, you know, always be in the habit of putting your pins only in the seam allowance anyway, whether it's a woven or leather. Just that is just a good common practice. But a lot of the time, you know, I don't like holes in leather. Holes in leather don't heal. You might see it. It just looks ugly. It's not my favorite thing. If you're someone who likes to pin things together to sew them more accurately, I recommend using binder clips instead of poking holes in your leather with pins. Okay. I have them in various sizes. This is a good size for sewing because when you clip it, okay, unless you're doing a tiny neckline, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, the clips will stay inside the seam allowance and not dent your leather inside, okay? Because you keep these in long enough and they will dent your leather, and you don't want that. You just do not want that. No holes, no dents. Keep everything smooth, creaseless, dentless, markless, you know. I pulled this out because when I was doing this, I did it on the fold because there's just so much paper going on. But with leather, you never want to cut on the fold because, again, you don't know what's going on the other side, okay? You don't want to fold your leather because, first of all, that'll crease. Second of all, it might not be big enough. Like, this is just, I would do it this way, actually. And it's definitely not big enough. So you might have to be strategic with a cut line on this big puff sleeve. And you don't know what's going on the other side, okay? So always make the full pattern piece when you're getting ready to cut leather. When you're cutting leather and you need to cut two, you always have to cut one at a time, okay? Just the name of the game. And so you need to really keep track. If you have to make a copy of your pattern card and check them off as you go, you want one of these and you want one of these on the other side. There are some methods where you've left the mark or the tape or whatever on the leather and you can use scissors to cut. This is perfectly fine. I used to work at a leather jacket company and we did some domestic production. We used to do the cutting in-house because our company did not trust other people to cut as well as our cutters. And then we would farm out the sewing actually. And those guys, first of all, they had these big wooden boards that were on a slant and they stood on these podiums behind. It looked like a podium where you give a speech, but maybe it was less slanted. And they were big, so they could slap down a whole lambskin and they would have room to see the whole skin. And they would just like calculate really fast because they've been doing it forever. Clock all the blemishes, marks, folds that could not be pressed out, all that stuff. And then they would lay down the pattern. Their patterns were thick like this. Okay, this is just a piece of illustration board. Those patterns are cut on boards like this or thicker. And so they slap down the pattern and they take these little knives. They don't look like X-Acto knives. They look more like, I don't know, they're curved, they're small, okay? And they're cutting. And they're sharpening those knives every single day. But they're just like, whoosh, 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 so fast. Those knives are so sharp. They work so fast. It's unreal. But they need the thick cardboard so that they have something really easy to butt up against with their knife. Okay? Preferably even fatter than this. At home, you can get one of these healing mats. This is the biggest one I have, and I use this for like small things. But yeah, I have a big board full of this kind of material that I do all kinds of knife cutting on. Okay, I'll use it until it like starts falling apart, and then I'll recycle and get another one. Another way the industry cuts leather is to use a clicker. And don't laugh at me, but I actually do not know if there is an official name for this and what that official name is. We always just called it the clicker in the factory. And this has to be for a style that you know you're going to literally make millions off of. At the leather jacket company I work for, they had this division of core classic styles that they were never going to not produce. And they had literally been producing those styles for decades. And so they had these patterns made out of metal, you know, for these classic styles, because those were the ones that were going to do a return on investment. So basically, let's say you have a sleeve. And these are all metal. If you look at it from the side, it's about 1 inch high, and this one end is really sharp. Okay, so it's like you take a sheet of metal and you just, you know, bend it into the shape of your pattern. Okay, and then you have these frames on top with these handles so that you can hold on to them without touching the sharp edges of the pattern. Okay, I'm gonna try looking for some pictures on the internet. And then, let's say you have your big old irregular shaped leather, okay, and you lay these clickers on it, you know, and they're best for like big hides, like cow hides, okay, that's the scale that's more likely, you know, really big cow hides. Whatever, and you lay them down and you have these bars across with the handles, okay, and you like kind of roll it into the mouth of the machine. It like sits on a platform and it rolls into the machine, and it ka-chunks, and so that the edges of this pattern cut, it punches it out of the leather. So if you're doing a bunch of these, it's like you lay out the leather. You take these metal pattern pieces and you just, you know, lay them out everywhere. All the pieces that you need. You roll it in, you ka-chunk, pull them out, and the cut edges of the metal have cut out all the leather pieces. Take it all out, throw it on another piece of leather, put down your frames again, ka-chunk, like that. But yeah, it is a 1-by-1 thing still, because leather is so, like, each piece is so completely different. You know, you can have pieces that are like 6 feet, okay, 6 square feet, all the way to 11 square feet. Like the sizes are all different. Like with a cow plunge, you can get like 25 square feet. You know, they're all different. The thicknesses are different. The way you design them is different. The surface and all the blemishes are different. So they are still being cut one at a time. There's a lot of tools to help you, but they're still cut one at a time. All right. So drop me your questions below and I'll see you in the next video. What do you do with the scraps? I've actually sold bags of scraps on Etsy back in the day when I was doing a lot of leather, like made-to-order pieces out of my studio 100 years ago. And then I would have all these leather scraps. And people who do small crafts love buying leather scraps because leather has no grain, so you can cut it every which way. You don't have to keep track of the selvage in order to use leather scraps. And yeah, so I would actually literally sell big old Ziploc baggies full of leather scraps to people who made small items.